Alright, so this is going to be a review for Stephen King's The Gunslinger, book one of the Dark Tower series, his amazing magnum opus, his life's work. This is the focal point of his entire writing career. Just about every book that he's written before book 7 of the series ties in some way to this. Now, some more than others will tie into this, and others will be some kind of small and consequential thing which will have a character or a particular monster or type of phenomenon which somehow connects back to this series. Before I get into the actual story of the Gunslinger, let me touch upon a couple of points for some background history. Before this book officially became a novel, it was originally 5 short stories. The Gunslinger, The Way Station, can't remember the middle story. I think it was The Oracle, The Slow Mutants, and The Gunslinger and the Man in Black. And the first 3 of these, I think, were published in the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and these started slowly being published after Salem's Lot, I believe, and then I think a couple of them made short stories printed in some issues of Playboy. But eventually, in the early 80s, he decided to turn the series into a book, so he put it out, and eventually over time it gained gradual popularity. And the second thing is that there are 2 versions of this book. One is when he was kind of fooling around with the idea, and he had the Dark Tower series being a long, epic story that had, endless chapters going to it. And he kind of was getting a feel for more of the world that he was creating for the Gunslinger with the first book. And the second one, which came out in 2003 before the release of book 5, kind of revised a lot of things and made it a little more accessible to readers who were coming on into the series. And this is a case where he actually wrote a book and revised it where it pays off much better in being able to explain things much better, whereas in the case of The Stand, where he wrote the revised version and it didn't do as well of a job as it should have. But the story of the Gunslinger. Alright, so our protagonist in this is Roland Deschain, the Gunslinger. He is a man out of time and is one of the last of his kind in a world which has moved on. The opening sentence of the story pretty much sums up the entire book. The man in black fled across the desert, and the Gunslinger followed. This man in black is a sorcerer who Roland is after, and is a vital key into gaining, or actually pointing him in the direction of the Dark Tower in which he seeks. The Dark Tower itself is the nexus point of all existence in Midworld, and is so much more prevalent for being the focal point of existence throughout all worlds. And this, as I kind of stated when I started the review intro, this is basically the Lord of the Rings combined with a backdrop of a Clint Eastwood Western. But the ideal difference is, instead of destroying something which is causing a problem, Roland is going on this quest to fix the problem which is taking place at the Dark Tower. Now, throughout the course of this story, we kind of get very slight hints, and there's a couple of major flashbacks to Roland's younger days, and we get to see where the Gunslingers in fact come from. The Gunslingers are descendants of Arthur Eld, who was like their world's version of King Arthur, and Roland is sort of one of those last he's sort of one of them last Arthurian type of dudes that we have for this world, and the Man in Black also has a personal connection to Roland from way back when. And in the course of the story, too, we get to see just, in fact, how much of this world in which they inhabit has moved on. We get vague recollections of things that are of our world, like the town in which he comes across in the desert, which has a lot of things, references to our world, like the fact that there's a piano player that plays Hey Jude a lot on the piano. And Roland finds himself in a lot of precarious situations too. The story is really good about fleshing out the journey of the character. We're given some insight into Roland, but there's not really much that makes him tick until a good character and a plot device to further expand upon Roland's character is introduced in a young boy named Jake Chambers, who Roland happens to find at an abandoned way station. If Roland's world has some vestiges of our world in it, Jake is the further point to establish that Roland's world is very different from ours. There's an interesting backstory about how Jake winds up winding up in Midworld, and Jake decides to join Roland on his quest for the Dark Tower. And the fact is, kind of with the thing too, that Roland has been wandering by himself for so long. He's kind of like what Mad Max was in the Road Warrior, to where he's kind of lost almost all vestiges of humanity. He's had little to no human contact, and being around Jake kind of reawakens a bit of the humanity that Roland has left in him. They have some small adventures, and what really defines Roland towards the end of the story is exactly how much of an obsession that he has with finding the Dark Tower. And this hangs in a situation to where Roland is literally hot on the heels of the Man in Black, and he has a very hard option in front of him. He can either let Jake die because of the dangerous situation that he's in at the time and follow the Man in Black and gain some directions to the tower, or he can save Jake and forever lose the major key that he needs to put him on the path to the Dark Tower. And it's really defined how Roland chooses to do that when he does, in fact, choose to let Jake die. And this will lead up to a final confrontation in between Roland and the Man in Black. Now, the final confrontation, I'm going to say, between them is not particularly... It's not a large physical battle by any means, but it's more of a matter of intellect, explaining, and a lot of foreshadowing for what's to come to Roland. And kind of lays out that his quest for this tower is sort of a bit of a damnation that he's had upon himself. I don't want to give too much away with the story, but the Gunslinger, it will be kind of a chore to get through. A lot of first books to series which have rave reviews are usually said to be the easiest to get into. Not always the case. They're a bit of a challenge. The Gunslinger, I will confess, can be a bit of a challenge to get through, but once you're able to get through it, and get on to the second book, it'll be much more of a payoff like that. So, if you're looking to get into the Dark Tower series, obviously you want to start here. It can be a little bit of a chore, but the series will pay off much, much better if you manage to get past this book.